The first thing I remember about that summer is the way the air felt heavy, like it was holding secrets it wasn't ready to give up. Our house sat at the edge of a quiet street where the trees leaned toward each other like old friends whispering across the road. Every evening, the cicadas started their restless chorus just as the sun dipped low, painting the windows gold and turning the dust in the air into something almost magical. I used to stand in the hallway and watch the light creep across the walls, wondering if my life would always feel this still, this carefully arranged. Then there was him. Eli moved in 3 houses down at the start of June, carrying boxes with a kind of nervous energy that made me curious. We were both 18, both pretending we knew exactly who we were supposed to be, and both lying to ourselves in small, quiet ways. He had a crooked smile and eyes that never seemed to settle, like he was always searching for something just beyond the horizon. The first time we spoke, it was over the low hum of a lawnmower and the smell of fresh cut grass. He asked me if I knew where the nearest bus stop was. I told him I didn't, even though I did, just to keep the conversation going a little longer. He laughed, and something in my chest tightened in a way I didn't yet have words for. Our days fell into an easy rhythm after that. We'd meet on the front steps in the evenings, sharing cheap soda and talking about nothing and everything. The sky would turn from blue to violet above us, and I'd feel like the world was shrinking down to just the space between our shoulders. But beneath the calm, there was a hum of tension I couldn't ignore. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and my parents were out, I'd hear a soft knock at my window instead of the front door. Sometimes, he wouldn't show up at all, and I'd sit there alone, staring at my phone, my mind racing with questions I was too afraid to ask. I started noticing the way his voice dropped when he said my name. The way his hand lingered on my arm a second too long. The way he'd look away, like he'd said too much without saying anything at all. Late one night, as a storm rolled in and thunder rattled the glass, I heard that knock again. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to make my heart jump into my throat. I stood in the dark, listening to the rain and the steady beat of my own pulse, wondering if opening that window would change everything I thought I knew about myself, and about him. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready for the answer. The mornings after that night always began the same way. Sunlight spilled through the thin curtains in my room, cutting bright lines across the floor and warming the edge of my bed. The house would be quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen below. It felt safe, predictable. Like the world was reminding me that nothing had actually changed. But I knew better. Every time I brushed my teeth, my mind wandered back to that soft knock at the window. The way my heart had pounded so loud I was sure Eli could hear it from the other side of the glass. I hadn't opened it that night. I'd stood there, frozen, while the rain fell harder and harder, until the sound of his knuckles faded into the storm. I didn't see him the next day. We had a routine by then. He'd walk past my house around noon, hands in his pockets, pretending he just happened to be going that way. I'd be waiting on the steps, pretending the same. But that day, the street stayed empty. The cicadas buzzed. A stray cat darted across the road. The world kept moving, and Eli was nowhere in it. By the third day, the quiet started to feel loud. I found myself standing at my bedroom window, staring down the street like I could summon him with sheer will. When my phone buzzed, my heart leaped every time. It was never him, just group chats, notifications, the dull echo of a life that suddenly felt like it was happening around me instead of with me. Finally, late one afternoon, I heard his bike before I saw him. The familiar rattle of the loose chain cut through the air, and there he was, pedaling slowly, like he wasn't sure if he should keep going or turn back. He stopped in front of my house, eyes scanning the windows until he found me. I went outside before I could talk myself out of it. "You disappeared," I said, trying to keep my voice light, casual. He shrugged, but it didn't reach his eyes. Had stuff to deal with. We sat on the steps again, the way we always did. The sky was a washed-out blue, clouds drifting lazily like they had nowhere better to be. He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve, and I studied the way his jaw tightened whenever he thought too hard about something. "Did you come by the other night?" I asked, my words barely louder than the wind in the trees. He froze. For a second, I thought he might deny it, laugh it off, change the subject. Instead, He nodded once, slow and careful, like the motion itself carried weight. I didn't think you'd answer, he said. I didn't even know why I knocked. The honesty in his voice made my chest ache. We didn't talk about it after that. Not really. We shifted back into our familiar rhythm, soda cans between us, jokes about the neighbors, plans for a future neither of us fully believed in. But something had changed. There was a tension in the air, thin and sharp like a wire stretched too tight. It showed in small ways. The way our shoulders brushed more often. The way our conversations trailed off into long, heavy silences. The way I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. One evening, he asked if I wanted to come with him to the old quarry on the edge of town. Everyone knew about it. It was the kind of place parents warned you to stay away from, the kind of place rumors grew like weeds. Why there? I asked. He smiled, that crooked, half-nervous smile. Because no one goes there anymore. We went just before sunset. The path was narrow, overgrown with weeds that brushed against our legs as we walked. The air smelled like damp earth and something metallic I couldn't quite place. When we reached the clearing, the quarry opened up in front of us, a wide, still pool of water reflecting the sky like a broken mirror. We sat on a flat rock near the edge, our feet dangling over the drop. This place used to be loud, Eli said. My dad told me they had machines here, trucks, people yelling all the time. Now it's just quiet. I watched the ripples in the water fade until it was perfectly still again. Do you miss the noise? He thought about it. Sometimes. But sometimes the quiet makes it easier to hear things you've been trying not to. The words settled between us, heavy and unspoken. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows grew longer. The air cooled. I wrapped my arms around myself without realizing it. Eli noticed and, after a moment's hesitation, took off his hoodie and handed it to me. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing. It was everything. On the way back, we walked closer than before, our steps falling into the same rhythm. The sky was dark by the time we reached my street, the houses lit up like islands in a sea of night. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? He asked, stopping under the streetlight. I swallowed. All the time. He nodded, like that was the answer he'd been expecting. After that, things started to blur. Days melted into each other, marked by stolen moments and half-finished conversations. We started texting late at night, messages growing longer, more personal. He told me about his family, about the expectations that weighed on him like a second skin. I told him things I'd never said out loud before. One night, I typed, then deleted, then typed again. Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we didn't have to pretend? The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Yeah, he wrote. I think about it more than I should. The knock at my window came back. Not every night, just often enough to keep my nerves on edge. Sometimes I'd open the curtain and see him standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, looking like he wasn't sure if he belonged on either side of the glass. Sometimes, there'd be no one. Just the echo of a sound that might have been real or might have been my imagination. One evening, when the house was empty and the sky was thick with clouds, I finally opened the window. We didn't say anything at first. We just stood there, separated by a frame of wood and a screen, the world holding its breath around us. I don't know what I'm doing, he said softly. Neither do I admitted. The rain started again, light at first, then harder. We talked in whispers, about fear, about wanting things we didn't know how to reach for, about how easy it was to feel alone even when you weren't. When he left, my room felt too quiet, too big. The next day, he didn't show up. Not on the street, not on my phone, not at my window that night. The silence stretched, heavy and cold, and for the first time, the tension that had been building between us felt like it might snap. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for a sound that never came. And somewhere deep down, I wondered if the moment I'd finally opened that window was also the moment I'd started to lose him. I found him where I didn't expect to. The old bleachers behind the high school had always been a forgotten place, a stretch of warped wood and rusted metal that no one bothered to fix because no one bothered to sit there anymore. The field below was empty, grass bending in the wind like it was bowing to something unseen. The sky hung low and gray, thick with the promise of rain. Eli was sitting at the very top row, hood pulled up, staring out at nothing. For a moment, I just watched him. The way his foot tapped against the bench in a restless rhythm. The way his shoulders were hunched, like he was trying to make himself smaller. I'd spent the whole day looking for him, my chest tight with a mix of anger and relief and something that felt too much like fear. Are you trying to disappear on purpose? I called out. He flinched, then turned. When he saw me, something crossed his face, surprise, maybe, or guilt. Or both. I didn't think you'd come here, he said. I didn't think you'd run, I shot back, climbing up the steps until I was a few rows below him. The metal groaned under my weight, the sound loud in the empty air. He looked away. I wasn't running. Then what were you doing? My voice softened despite myself. You vanished. The wind picked up, tugging at his hoodie. He sighed, a long breath that seemed to carry weeks of things he hadn't said. My dad saw us, he finally admitted. My heart dropped into my stomach. Saw us? How? Just talking. On your street. But he asked questions. The kind of questions that don't really need answers. He rubbed a hand over his face. I panicked. I sat down, the cold of the metal seeping through my jeans. So you decided the best move was to pretend I didn't exist. He winced. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. The clouds above shifted, and a low rumble of thunder rolled in the distance. I meant, he swallowed. I meant I don't know how to be this. Whatever this is. With you. The words hit harder than I expected. I stood up, pacing a few steps along the bench. You think I do? You think I wake up every day feeling brave about any of this? I stopped, turned back to him. I opened that window because I trusted you. He looked up at me then, eyes wide and raw. And I wanted to step through it. I still do. But wanting something doesn't make it safe. The first drops of rain fell, darkening the wood around us. We both laughed softly at the same time, a tired, almost broken sound. The absurdity of arguing in the rain, on forgotten bleachers, about feelings neither of us had planned for. Do you remember the quarry? I asked. He nodded. You said the quiet made it easier to hear things you've been trying not to. I met his gaze. This is what I've been hearing. He stood up, slowly, like he was approaching something fragile. And what if what I hear is everything I'm supposed to be afraid of? I didn't have an answer for that. The rain picked up, soaking through my shirt, plastering his hoodie to his shoulders. We stood there, close enough that I could feel the heat of him even in the cold. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat louder than the last. I don't want to lose you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. But I don't know how to keep you either. He closed his eyes for a second, like he was bracing himself. When he opened them, there was something new there, resolve, maybe. Or surrender. My mom's out of town, he said quietly. Just for the night. The implication hung between us, heavy and electric. I hesitated. Every warning I'd ever been given, every rule I'd ever followed, every version of myself I thought I was supposed to be, all of it crowded into my mind at once. I thought about my house, my parents, my room, the window that had become a doorway to something I couldn't quite name. Eli, I started, and then stopped. If we do this, it doesn't go back to how it was. He nodded. I know. Thunder cracked overhead, sharp and sudden. The rain came down harder, blurring the world around us into streaks of gray and silver. We ran, down the bleachers, across the field, shoes slipping in the wet grass, laughter and breathless gasps mixing with the sound of the storm. By the time we reached his house, we were soaked and shaking, water dripping from our hair onto the porch. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. The air smelled like soap and something faintly floral. The clock in the living room ticked loud enough to make me aware of every second passing. We stood in the doorway, rainwater pooling at our feet. This is where I usually stop, he said, half smiling, half serious. Right before I overthink everything. Maybe don't stop this time, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a step closer. So did I. The space between us disappeared, not in a rush, but in a slow, deliberate way that made my pulse race. I could see every freckle on his face, every flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Tell me to go," he said softly. "And I will." I opened my mouth. I closed it. Instead, I reached out, my hand stopping just short of his chest, hovering there like it was waiting for permission. He covered my hand with his own. The world seemed to narrow down to that single point of contact. The storm outside, the ticking clock, the expectations, the fears, all of it faded into the background. We didn't kiss. Not then. But the almost was somehow louder than anything we could have done. A car passed by outside, headlights sweeping across the windows, and in that brief flash of light, I saw my reflection in the glass behind him. I barely recognized myself. The sound of my phone buzzing in my pocket broke the moment. I froze. Eli pulled back, just a fraction. "You should check that." I didn't want to, but I did. A message from my mom. "On our way home. 10 minutes. The tension snapped back into place, sharper than before. "I have to go," I said, the words heavy with everything I didn't want to leave behind. He nodded, jaw tight. "I know." We stood there, the almost still hanging between us, unanswered and unresolved. As I stepped back into the rain, my heart pounding, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just crossed a line we couldn't see, and that the real consequences were still waiting for us on the other side. The rain followed me all the way home, a soft, relentless whisper against my jacket, against my thoughts, against everything I didn't know how to say out loud. My mom's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. The porch light glowed warm and steady, like nothing in the world had shifted. Like I hadn't just stood in someone else's living room, my hand in his, my heart somewhere I wasn't sure I could get back. Inside, the house smelled like dinner and familiarity. My parents talked about traffic, about a movie they wanted to watch, about ordinary things that suddenly felt unreal. I nodded, smiled, played my part. But my mind was still stuck in that quiet room with the ticking clock and the space Eli and I hadn't crossed. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for the knock that didn't come. I replayed everything in my head, the way his hand felt over mine, the way his voice had dropped when he told me to tell him to go. The way I hadn't. I wondered what that said about me. About him. About us. My phone buzzed sometime after midnight. "Eli, you home?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. "Me? Yeah." There was a pause, long enough for my heart to start racing again. "Eli, I keep thinking about what almost happened." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. "Me. Me too." The conversation drifted after that, slow and careful, like we were both afraid of stepping too far in either direction. We talked about the rain, about school starting soon, about the quarry and how quiet it must be now after the storm. We didn't talk about the living room. We didn't talk about the almost. But it was there, in every message, in every space between words. The next few days felt different. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in the way the air feels charged before lightning strikes. We went back to sitting on my front steps in the evenings, sharing soda and jokes, pretending we were the same as before. We weren't. Our shoulders didn't touch as easily. Our laughter didn't come as freely. There was a carefulness between us, like we were both handling something fragile and dangerous at the same time. One afternoon, I noticed a car parked across the street while we were talking. An unfamiliar one. The engine was off, but the windows were down. I caught a glimpse of someone inside, watching. "Do you know them?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Eli followed my gaze. His face tightened for just a second before he shook his head. "Probably just someone waiting," but his foot started tapping against the concrete, fast and nervous. Later, when he left, he didn't look back the way he usually did. That night, I heard the knock again. It was lighter this time. Almost hesitant. I opened the window, my heart in my throat. Eli stood there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes flicking toward the street and back to me. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Then why are you?" I whispered back. He hesitated. "Because I didn't want to go to sleep without seeing you." The honesty in his voice made my chest ache. We didn't touch. We just talked, quietly, about small things. A class he was worried about. A song I'd been listening to on repeat. The way the stars looked brighter after the rain. But there was something else there too, unspoken and heavy. At one point, he leaned closer, his face lit by the faint glow from my room. I could see every detail, the line of his jaw, the crease between his brows, the way his breath fogged the screen between us. For a split second, I thought he might step forward, might close the distance we'd been circling for weeks. Instead, he pulled back. "I'm scared," he admitted. "So am I said. We stood there in the quiet, the house behind me and the dark street behind him, like we were both caught between two different worlds. A sound down the block, a car door slamming, footsteps on pavement, made him flinch. "I have to go," he said quickly. He disappeared into the shadows before I could respond. The next day, he didn't show up. No bike rattling down the street. No texts. No knock at my window. By the time the sun set, my phone was still silent, and the quiet felt heavier than it ever had before. I stood at my window, looking out at the empty street, wondering if the moment in his living room had changed everything, or if it had only been the beginning of something neither of us was ready to face yet. The days that followed felt like walking through a world that had shifted just a few inches to the left, close enough to recognize, far enough to feel wrong. Eli eventually came back, but not in the way he used to. He didn't linger on my front steps or text late into the night. When we passed each other on the street, he'd smile, polite and careful, like we were acquaintances instead of something unfinished. The space between us wasn't empty anymore. It was crowded with everything we hadn't said. I told myself it was better this way. Safer, easier to breathe. But every time I saw him, my chest tightened anyway. One afternoon, we ended up alone in the small park at the end of our block, sitting on opposite ends of a bench that had once been ours. The sky was pale and overcast, the kind of gray that made the world feel muted. Leaves skittered across the concrete in the wind. "School starts next week," he said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," I replied. "Feels like everything's about to change." He nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. Maybe it already did. The words hung there, heavy and fragile. I wanted to reach out, to ask him what he meant, or maybe to tell him what I meant. But fear wrapped around my thoughts, tighter than any rule or expectation ever had. So I stayed still. A group of kids ran past us, laughing, their voices bright and careless. I watched them go, wondering when things had stopped feeling that simple. Eli stood up first. "I should go." "Okay," I said, even though my chest ached at how easy it was for him to say it now. He took a few steps, then stopped. Turned back. "There are things I don't know how to be," he said quietly. "But there are things I don't know how to stop being either." Before I could respond, he walked away. That night, I lay in bed with my window open, listening to the distant sounds of the neighborhood settling into sleep. A dog barked. A car passed. Somewhere, a radio played softly. I waited for the knock. It didn't come. Instead, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Eli, do you ever think about what would happen if we didn't keep choosing the easy way out?" My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, the weight of the question pressing down on me. Me. Every day, the three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Eli, I don't know if I'm brave enough yet. But I don't think I'm done either." I rolled onto my side, the glow of the screen lighting up the dark room. Me. Neither am I. I set the phone down, the conversation unfinished, the future just as uncertain as it had ever been. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees, carrying with it the same quiet promise it always had, that something was waiting, just beyond the edge of what we were willing to reach for. And as I lay there, listening, I couldn't help but wonder which of us would be the first to finally open the window again. The first thing I noticed that morning was how quiet the house felt. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses against your ears and makes you aware of every small sound. The hum of the refrigerator. The faint creak of the floorboards when I shifted my weight. The wind brushing against the curtains like it was trying to get my attention. I stood at the kitchen window, watching clouds drift slowly across a pale blue sky. The day looked ordinary, too ordinary, like it was pretending nothing underneath the surface was about to crack open. My phone sat on the counter, face down. I kept glancing at it, telling myself I wasn't waiting for anything. telling myself I didn't care if it buzzed or stayed silent. But every second that passed felt heavier than the last. Outside, the street was waking up. A neighbor's dog barked. Someone's car door slammed. Life moved forward with a kind of confidence I didn't feel. Then there was Eli. He lived close enough that I could see his house from my bedroom window, a narrow place with white siding and a porch light that flickered when it rained. Most mornings, I'd catch a glimpse of him leaving, backpack slung over one shoulder, head down like he was trying not to be seen. Most mornings, I'd pretend I wasn't watching. We hadn't spoken in 2 days. 2 days wasn't long in the grand scheme of things. But it felt like an eternity when you were used to sharing every small thought, every half-formed idea, every quiet moment that made the world feel a little less lonely. I told myself it was fine. That space was healthy. That not everything had to be said. But my chest didn't believe me. I went back to my room, the sunlight spilling across my bed in warm, careless stripes. I sat down and picked at a loose thread on my sleeve, my mind drifting to the last time I'd seen him. The way he'd hesitated before turning away. The way his mouth had opened, like he was about to say something, and then closed again. There were so many almosts between us. Almost a confession. Almost a promise. Almost something neither of us had the courage to name. A sudden sound outside made me look up. A knock. Not at the front door. At my window. My heart jumped so hard it felt like it hit my throat. I stood there, frozen, staring at the glass. The curtain shifted slightly in the breeze, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow on the other side. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knock came again, softer this time. Careful. Like whoever was out there wasn't sure they were welcome. My mind raced. What if I opened it? What if I didn't? What if this was the moment everything finally tipped one way or the other? I took a step forward, my hand hovering inches from the latch. And in that space between my fingers and the window, I realized the real question wasn't who was standing outside. It was whether I was ready for what would happen if I let them in.